Have you ever felt betrayed at work? Have you ever had your hard work stolen only to watch someone else take the credit? In this story, our protagonist faced just that, and their hidden recording revealed the truth. It was a regular morning, or so I thought. The type of day where the sun gently filters through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room, and the faint hum of the office air conditioning is the only sound you can hear. I was sitting at my desk, the weight of the project I'd been working on for weeks pressing down on me. I had given it my all. My fingers ached from the countless hours of typing. My eyes burned from the sleepless nights spent reviewing every detail to make sure it was perfect. Every part of me had gone into this project, and finally it was done. I was ready to share it with the world, and more importantly, I was ready to receive recognition for it. But when I opened my email, my heart sank. There it was, a message from my manager congratulating Sarah on her outstanding contribution to the project. Sarah? The very same Sarah who had sat next to me in those meetings, nodded along while I presented my ideas and smiled while I did the heavy lifting. Sarah, who had quietly taken credit for every ounce of my work. The email wasn't just congratulating her for being a part of the team. It was lauding her as the lead. I felt my world tilt. This couldn't be real. I reread it, my eyes racing across the words, trying to make sense of what had just happened. No, I knew what I had done, I knew the hours I'd sacrificed, and there was no way she could have contributed the way she claimed. The betrayal stung, not just because she'd taken credit, but because she had done it so effortlessly, as if she had earned it. As if I hadn't been the one to stay late, fine-tuning every detail while she went home at 5. As if I wasn't the one pushing through the doubts and the deadlines. I wanted to storm into her office, demand an explanation, tell her to her face what I knew. But instead I sat there, silent, cold, my mind racing. No, I couldn't just go in there with anger. This needed to be strategic. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not like this. Not when I had worked so hard. So I did what most people wouldn't have done. I began recording. It wasn't about revenge at first. It was about getting the truth. It was about making sure I had undeniable proof before I went to the manager. I wasn't going to rely on just my word. I'd record every conversation, every boast, every subtle mention of her work, and when the time came, I would show everyone the truth. But I had to be patient. Sarah had no idea I was watching her, no idea that every time she spoke, I was capturing it. I was laying the groundwork for something bigger, something that would bring it all crashing down when the moment was right. This was just the beginning. But when would that moment come? As the days dragged on, Sarah's confidence grew, and with each passing conversation, the frustration inside me swelled. Every time I walked into the office, she greeted me with that same smug smile, the one that said, "I know something you don't." It was infuriating, seeing her claim ownership of something that wasn't hers. I would sit there, watching her chat with colleagues, bragging about how she had done the most work on the project, how it was her vision that had made it successful. I was fuming inside, but I kept my composure, never once letting my anger slip. Instead, I let her continue. Every boast, every word she spoke became a piece of evidence, a building block for the plan I was so carefully constructing. She didn't know it, but with every sentence, I was getting closer to bringing everything to light. I was patient. Too patient, maybe, but it wasn't about acting on my emotions. It was about exposing the truth in the most powerful way possible. The more Sarah talked, the more I saw how much she had underestimated me. She thought she could lie without consequence, that her charm and smooth words would let her get away with this. But she didn't realize that I was keeping track of every word, storing it all away for when the time came. I had become a silent observer, letting her dig her own grave. She was so sure of herself, too sure, but what she didn't know was that I was playing the long game. There were moments when I felt like screaming at her, when I felt like confronting her right then and there, but I resisted. Every time she opened her mouth, I recorded it, making sure I had a record of everything. What amazed me was how casually she stole credit. It was as if she didn't even think twice about it. I would sit there listening to her talk about how she'd single-handedly pulled the project together, and all I could do was press record. The anger started to feel less like a personal attack and more like a quiet understanding of how easily people think they can get away with things. I wasn't about to let her think that her lies would go unnoticed. I had a plan, a slow burn that would eventually explode, and I was savoring the buildup. Every day I got closer to my goal. Every boast she made, every lie she told, made the final reveal even sweeter. But the waiting was killing me. I wanted to act now, to expose her and let the truth spill out. Yet, I knew better. I had to wait for the perfect moment, and I couldn't let impatience cloud my judgment. The truth would win, and it would win on my terms. But the question was, when would that moment arrive? How much longer could I keep this up before everything came crashing down? Days turned into weeks, and Sarah's ego swelled with every passing moment. It felt like a slow burn, the kind that wears you down even though you can see the smoke rising in front of you. I had been recording for what felt like an eternity, capturing every single conversation, every boast she made, and yet the moment I was waiting for still hadn't arrived. She kept strutting around the office, oblivious to the fact that I was just quietly biding my time. She'd drop phrases like, "This project really showed what I'm capable of," or "I was the one who made sure we hit every deadline," and each time, it took every ounce of my self-control not to call her out, not to scream at her for everything she'd stolen from me. It was maddening watching her walk around as if she'd done all the work, while I knew deep down that I had been the one holding everything together. But that wasn't the approach I was taking. No, I was playing the long game. And it wasn't easy. Every time she spoke, I felt my patience being tested. I wanted to pull her aside and tell her I knew exactly what she was doing, but I knew that would just lead to a messy confrontation, and that wasn't going to solve anything. So I kept quiet. I kept recording. It was starting to feel like I was waiting for a storm, one I could see on the horizon but couldn't reach. The longer I let her go on with her lies, the more fuel I was adding to the fire. I knew she was digging herself into a hole, but each day felt like an eternity. The hardest part wasn't even hearing her lie about the project. It was the knowing that I had the truth in my hands, but I couldn't reveal it yet. I had to be careful. Timing was everything. What if I jumped the gun too early? What if my plan backfired? These thoughts swirled around in my head as I listened to Sarah talk about how her hard work had paid off. Every word she said felt like a slap in the face, but I kept my cool. I was so close to the moment when everything would change. But the waiting was excruciating. Sometimes I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. I wasn't a confrontational person. I didn't enjoy drama. But this wasn't about drama. This was about principle. She had taken something that wasn't hers, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. But as the days wore on, I started to wonder if I was becoming obsessed. Was I overthinking this? Should I just confront her now and get it over with? The answer came to me just as quickly as the doubt. No, I couldn't rush it. I had to wait. The moment would come when it was least expected, when the truth would be revealed in the most powerful way. And when it did, I would be ready. But how much longer could I keep this up? How much longer could I sit by while she paraded her lies around like she was untouchable? It happened on a Wednesday. I was sitting in the break room, sipping on my coffee and trying to gather my thoughts, when I overheard Sarah talking to a few of our colleagues. Her voice was louder than usual, brimming with excitement, and I could hear the pride in her tone. As much as I tried to tune it out, I couldn't help but catch snippets of the conversation. "I really pulled this whole project together," she said with a smirk. "Without me, they wouldn't have known what to do. I made sure everything came together perfectly. It was all my vision." My stomach dropped. It was as if she had just stabbed me in the back all over again. My hands gripped the edge of my coffee mug so tightly I thought it might crack under the pressure. How could she say that? Her vision? It was my work. My ideas. My blood, sweat, and tears that had brought this project to life, not hers. And here she was, casually claiming credit for it like it was no big deal. The worst part? She was so confident, so sure of herself, as though no one would question her. She was so used to getting away with it. But not this time. I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't know what came over me, but in that moment I knew I had to act. My heart was pounding, my mind racing with a mix of anger and resolve, but I kept calm. I didn't confront her right then and there. Instead, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to expose her, but I couldn't do it without evidence. I had been recording everything, yes, but I needed more. This moment was the crack in the armor I had been waiting for. The proof I had would now have a specific focus. The lies she had been telling were no longer vague. She had put it all out there for everyone to hear. I stood up, casually walking away from the break room, all while my mind was churning with the possibilities. I didn't let her see that I'd heard her. I didn't want her to know just how close she was to being caught. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and began typing, but my mind wasn't on the work in front of me. It was on the recording app on my phone, silently running in my pocket, waiting for the next piece of evidence to unfold. But as much as I knew I had the upper hand, as much as I could feel the weight of the truth growing heavier in my hands, there was still that tiny voice in the back of my mind asking if I was doing the right thing. The truth was on my side, but the weight, the slow build-up, it was becoming a challenge. How much longer could I wait? I had the pieces, the lies, the recordings. It was just a matter of finding the right moment to let it all fall apart. I wasn't going to rush it, though. No, this wasn't a quick fix. This was a carefully orchestrated plan that would expose her for who she truly was. But could I wait for the moment to come? Or would my patience finally snap under the weight of her arrogance? The days seemed to stretch longer and longer as Sarah continued to lie with increasing audacity, and my resolve was starting to crack. It was as if I were standing in a room filled with smoke. Each breath I took heavier than the last, every lie she spoke thickening the air. I had been patient, too patient. But there was something about the way she carried herself now that made me feel like I was running out of time. Every time she spoke about the project, every time she gloated about her vision or how she managed the team, it felt like a needle pricking at my skin, one jab at a time. That smug expression, the way she would brush past me in the hallway like she was untouchable, it was all getting to me. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside, the quiet, controlled rage I'd been holding back for weeks now threatening to spill over. But I held it in. I kept my composure and I kept recording. But then came the day it all changed. Our manager called for a meeting to discuss the project's final presentation, and Sarah was practically glowing. She was so eager to take the floor and explain how everything had come together, how it was all due to her leadership, how she had masterminded the entire thing. And it was in that moment, as I sat across from her in the meeting, that I realized something. She truly thought she had won. She thought she had pulled off the perfect heist, that no one knew the truth, that no one could touch her. The arrogance in her voice made me feel sick, but at the same time, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I had what I needed. The recordings, the evidence, it was all there, and now it was time to make my move. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't filled with the rush of emotion I had felt when I first found out she had stolen my work. No, now I felt something else, control. The kind of control you feel when you know the truth is on your side. When you've collected the pieces of the puzzle and can see the picture clearly, waiting to show it to the world. The moment came suddenly, almost without warning. Sarah was wrapping up her presentation, confident and smug as ever, when I stood up. The room grew quiet, all eyes on me as I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The shock on Sarah's face was immediate. I could see the panic rising in her eyes as I unlocked my phone and pressed play. And there it was, her voice, clear as day, boasting about how she had carried the project, how she had saved the team from disaster, how she was the one who had brought everything to life. The words rang through the room like a death knell. No one said anything at first. The silence was deafening. Sarah's face turned pale as the realization set in. The truth was out. There was nowhere for her to hide. She stammered, tried to explain, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew it was too late. The damage had already been done. Our manager didn't even need to say anything. The evidence spoke for itself. It was all over for her, and me? I felt a strange sense of satisfaction wash over me, but it wasn't about victory. It wasn't about winning. It was about justice. It was about knowing that the truth had finally come to light, that Sarah's lies had been exposed for what they were, and I had been the one to expose them. The room was still silent, everyone in shock at what they'd just heard. Sarah, on the other hand, was scrambling, trying to salvage her reputation, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew it was done. The truth had a way of doing that, didn't it? It had a way of showing up when you least expect it, and when it did, there was no hiding from it. I watched her flounder, watched her stumble over her words, and I couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride. The game was over. But what would happen next? The aftermath was like a storm moving through the office, swift and unforgiving. The shock waves from the recording lingered in the room, vibrating in the air, making everyone uneasy. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but it also felt heavier than ever. Sarah's once confident demeanor was now completely shattered. I could see it in her eyes, the confusion, the disbelief, and beneath it all, a sinking realization that she had been exposed. There was no way out. As I watched her fumble, her words tumbling over themselves in a desperate attempt to explain, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. For so long, I had been silently enduring, recording every lie, quietly preparing for this moment. And now it was finally here. But there was no triumph, no joy in seeing her squirm. It wasn't about making her suffer. It was about making sure the truth was known. For me, it was never about revenge, but about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Our manager didn't say much at first, but his silence spoke volumes. The disappointment in his eyes was enough to let Sarah know that no amount of scrambling would save her now. The lies had been laid bare, and there was no way to take them back. I could feel the tension building in the room as the weight of the situation settled over everyone. No one said anything, and for a moment it felt like time itself had stopped. Sarah, once so confident, now stood there with no defense, exposed for what she had done. The moment was surreal. I had spent so much time and energy preparing for this exact moment, but when it finally came, it didn't feel the way I had imagined. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. I watched as Sarah stumbled over her words, desperately trying to salvage what was left of her reputation, but it was clear she had lost the battle. She had stolen what wasn't hers, and now she was paying the price. Our manager turned to her, his expression stern. "Sarah, I'm disappointed," he said, his voice cold. "This is a serious violation of trust. You've taken credit for someone else's work, and that's something we don't tolerate here." His words were sharp, and I could see the weight of them sinking in. She had no defense. She was caught, plain and simple. There was no room for excuses. In the end, the consequences were swift. Sarah was removed from the project, her position in the company now in jeopardy. The trust that had once been there, the respect she had built over the years, all of it was gone. She had sacrificed it for a lie, for something as fleeting as credit. As for me, the recognition didn't come in the way I had hoped. I wasn't paraded around as a hero, and there was no fanfare for exposing the truth. But in a way, that was exactly what I wanted. The satisfaction wasn't in the applause, it was in knowing I had done the right thing. I had taken the high road, and the truth had come to light. But there was still a part of me that wondered if things could have been different. What if I had spoken up sooner? What if I hadn't waited so long? But deep down, I knew it was all worth it. Sarah had shown her true colors, and she had paid the price for it, and me? I had learned something important, that sometimes the truth doesn't need to be shouted from the rooftops. It just needs to be revealed quietly and undeniably. But as Sarah left the office, the question remained, what would happen to me now? After Sarah was removed from the project and the dust finally settled, the office atmosphere felt different. It was quiet at first, everyone still processing what had happened. People were hesitant to talk about it openly, but the undercurrent of gossip was undeniable. Whispers filled the air, and I could feel eyes on me every time I walked down the hall. It was strange. I had exposed the truth, brought Sarah's lies into the light, but now I was the one left to deal with the fallout. The praise never came, not in the way I had imagined. In some ways, it felt as though I had taken a hit by bringing it all to light. I hadn't done this for a pat on the back or to get ahead. No, this wasn't about me trying to prove anything to anyone. It was about doing the right thing, even if it meant making myself uncomfortable. But there was a weight to it now, a kind of emptiness in the recognition I hadn't received. I realized that sometimes standing up for what's right doesn't lead to rewards or gratitude. It simply means that you've done what needed to be done, and you move on. But as I sat at my desk, going over the project one last time, I started to understand something deeper. The whole situation had taught me something important. Integrity is far more valuable than recognition. I didn't need anyone else's approval to feel like I had done the right thing. I knew it in my heart. I had stood up for myself, for my work, and I had let the truth speak for itself. That was enough. Sarah's departure was a wake-up call to the rest of the team. They saw what happened when someone thought they could take advantage of others, when they thought they could climb the ladder by stepping on those around them. But it was also a lesson for me. I had learned that silence isn't always the answer. Sometimes you have to speak up even when it feels uncomfortable. And sometimes the truth isn't about getting a victory. It's about being honest, even when no one else will be. I thought back to the moment when I first found out Sarah had taken credit for my work. I was angry. I wanted to lash out, to tell everyone what had happened right then and there. But I didn't. I waited, and in the end, it was the patience that made the difference. Waiting, recording, gathering the facts, those were the tools I had used to make sure the truth would come to light in the most undeniable way possible. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. But it worked. And as I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized how much I had grown from it. I had faced a difficult situation head-on, and instead of allowing myself to be consumed by the emotions of it all, I had stayed calm, collected, and strategic. I had learned that sometimes taking the high road means letting the truth unfold in its own time. It was never about taking down someone else, it was about standing up for myself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a quiet sense of peace. I hadn't just won back my work. I had gained something far more valuable, a deeper understanding of who I was and what I stood for. And with that understanding, I knew the next steps would be mine to take. As the weeks passed, life in the office began to return to normal, or at least the appearance of normal. But for me, things were never quite the same. The tension that had filled the air when Sarah was exposed had dissipated, but it had left behind an undercurrent of unease. The whispers had faded and the daily interactions had gone back to their usual rhythm. But it felt different now. I walked into the office every day with the weight of what had happened still pressing on me. I had exposed the truth, and while Sarah's reputation had taken a dive, I found myself wondering how the whole ordeal would shape me in the long run. People respected me for it, yes, but there was also an awkward distance that had formed between me and some of my colleagues. I wasn't sure whether they viewed me as a whistleblower, a hero, or someone who had just stirred the pot for no reason. The hardest part was that it felt like the dynamic in the office had shifted, but I wasn't sure whether I had changed it, or if it was just a natural consequence of the drama that had unfolded. People were quieter around me, their interactions more reserved. I didn't mind it as much as I thought I would, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The truth, after all, had a way of doing that. It didn't just affect the person being exposed. It changed the relationships around them too. Sarah's absence was noticeable, though no one ever spoke about it directly. She had been part of the team for so long, and now she was gone. The space she left behind wasn't just physical. It was emotional too. We all felt it, even if no one acknowledged it out loud. But while the office was adjusting to her absence, I was adjusting to something else, myself. This experience had forced me to examine my own values, my own sense of right and wrong. I had acted on principle, not out of anger or desire for recognition, but for a deeper, unspoken need to stand by what was right. And in doing so, I realized something. Standing up for myself wasn't just about confronting Sarah. It was about confronting the parts of myself that had been too quiet, too passive. For so long, I had let my work speak for itself, assuming that the recognition would come when it was deserved. But I had learned that sometimes you have to be the one to make the truth known, even when it's uncomfortable. I had gained a new understanding of myself not just as a worker, but as a person. And it was that realization that made everything worth it. I had become someone who was willing to stand up, even when it meant being vulnerable, even when it meant being the one to rock the boat. The office had its own way of bouncing back from Sarah's departure, but for me, it was a quiet transformation. I didn't need validation anymore. I knew what I had done, and more importantly, I knew why I had done it. But even with that sense of self-assurance, there was a lingering question that I couldn't shake. Was this just the beginning of something new? What did this mean for my future in the company? Could I continue to work in an environment where I had exposed such a major betrayal, or would the scars of this situation follow me no matter what? As much as I had learned from the experience, there was still more to uncover, and that meant facing the future with the same integrity I had used to confront the past. The weeks following Sarah's departure were strangely quiet. At first, it seemed like things were settling back into a routine, but beneath the surface, I could feel the tension still simmering. The office was not the same. People still worked, still went about their day-to-day tasks, but the air was thick with unspoken thoughts. I could feel it every time I entered a room in awkwardness, a shift in the way people viewed me. Some of them would give me a nod of acknowledgement, a subtle glance that said, "We know what you did," but no one wanted to really talk about it. It wasn't just Sarah who was gone. It was the ease we'd all shared before her betrayal. It was a reminder that nothing in the office would ever be the same again. What troubled me more, though, was how much I had changed. I had come out of this experience feeling like I had done the right thing, feeling proud of standing my ground. But over time, I started to question whether I had truly learned something valuable, or if I had just been playing a game of self-preservation. Had I acted out of integrity, or had I simply been protecting my own sense of justice? That question haunted me. I knew I had done the right thing by exposing Sarah, but I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I was now just as obsessed with being right as she had been with taking credit for something she didn't deserve. I had wanted to feel vindicated. I wanted to prove that I was the one in the right, that my hard work should have been recognized. But was I really standing up for what was right, or was I seeking some form of validation that I had been denied for so long? These doubts weighed on me, and I couldn't find peace in the simple satisfaction of seeing Sarah get what was coming to her. The aftermath of the entire situation left me with more questions than answers. I wasn't the same person who had walked into that meeting room months ago, innocent and trusting. Now, I was someone who had exposed the flaws in the system. Someone who had stood up for themselves, but at the cost of personal peace. It was like I had cracked open a door to a world of office politics, of backstabbing, and of truth hidden behind the veneer of professionalism. Once you see the truth, you can never unsee it. And now, as I sat at my desk, staring at the empty space where Sarah used to sit, I realized just how deep this experience had cut. I had learned something invaluable about the world I worked in, but it had come at the cost of my own sense of certainty. I wasn't sure where I stood anymore. I wasn't sure what my future in the company looked like, or even if I was cut out for this kind of world. And that uncertainty was far more difficult to deal with than anything Sarah had ever done. The truth had set me free, but it had also shackled me in ways I hadn't expected. I had faced the truth head-on, but now I had to face the harder question. What did it mean for my life moving forward? Was I ready to keep playing this game, or had the cost of truth finally begun to sink in? The days after Sarah's departure had passed, and the reality of the situation began to settle in. The truth had been exposed, the lies had unraveled, and justice had been served, but I was still left with something I hadn't anticipated: uncertainty. The feeling of relief that came from knowing I had done the right thing didn't last as long as I thought it would. Instead, a gnawing sense of discomfort settled in, and I found myself questioning everything. It was easy to think of standing up for yourself as a simple, righteous decision. It was easy to assume that once the truth came out, everything would fall into place and life would move on. But the aftermath had proven to be more complicated than I'd imagined. People didn't talk about it, but the shift was palpable. My colleagues still respected me, but there was an unspoken distance. I could feel it in the way they spoke to me, in the way the office dynamics had subtly changed. I had done what I needed to do, but I wasn't sure what that meant for my future. Did this make me a troublemaker? A whistleblower? I had exposed a lie, and while I felt justified, I couldn't help but wonder if that would affect how people saw me going forward. What did it mean for my career if I had just rocked the boat? But the most pressing question was whether I would be able to stay true to the principles that had guided me during this whole ordeal. I had stood my ground, done what I believed was right, and had faced the consequences with integrity. But could I keep that same conviction moving forward, especially in a place where I had already taken such a stand? The temptation to stay comfortable, to follow the crowd, was there, of course, but I had already crossed that line, exposed something bigger than myself. I wasn't going to back down now. I realized that the decision I faced wasn't just about staying in the company or leaving, it was about my values. Could I continue to stand firm in them? Could I navigate the workplace, where honesty often takes a back seat to convenience, and keep the integrity I had fought so hard to maintain? The truth had set me free in one way, but it had also trapped me in a new set of questions, a new challenge that I hadn't expected. Could I continue to stand for what was right, even when it wasn't the easy path? Could I maintain my principles in the face of the subtle pressures of office politics, in a place that often rewarded those who played the game and not those who told the truth? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the journey wasn't over. Standing up for yourself wasn't just a momentary decision, it was an ongoing commitment. A commitment to keep your integrity intact, no matter how difficult it might be, no matter how uncomfortable. And so I made a decision. It was time to face the future, not just the office, but my career, my goals, and my own personal growth. I had already proven to myself that I could stand up for what was right, but now I had to prove that I could maintain that strength day in and day out. I couldn't let the weight of this experience turn me into someone who compromised for convenience, who backed down in the face of adversity. I would walk this path with my head held high. But I couldn't ignore the reality this experience had changed me, and it was time to embrace that change, whatever it might bring. The future was uncertain, but I was ready to take it on with the same integrity that had gotten me this far. It wasn't just about surviving the fallout of this situation. It was about thriving in spite of it. I had spent weeks reflecting on what had happened, on the choices I had made, the consequences I had faced, and the person I had become as a result. I had stood up for myself, taken down a liar, and exposed the truth when no one else would. But as much as I had gained a sense of justice, I realized there was something more I had to contend with now, the decision of what came next. The office was quieter without Sarah, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something heavier hanging in the air now. People had begun to treat me differently, some with respect, others with caution. And it wasn't just in the office, it was in myself too. I had walked into that meeting room months ago, unsure of what would happen, but confident that I was doing the right thing. But now I wasn't so sure anymore. The path ahead was unclear, and the weight of what I had done settled on me in ways I didn't expect. I realized that this wasn't just about exposing Sarah, it wasn't just about being right. It was about the future, about how I would move forward in the company and in my life. Could I stay true to my principles, or would I be forced to compromise? Could I continue to work in a place where I had made such a powerful stand? The office would never be the same for me. It wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about me. I had exposed a lie, yes, but now I was faced with my own truth. Was I prepared to live with the consequences of my actions? Was I prepared to keep walking this path, knowing that it would always make me different? The thought was both freeing and terrifying. I had acted with integrity, but I had also stirred the pot, and now the path forward felt uncertain. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became I had to make a decision. The easy route would be to stay, to let things settle, to try and fit back into the rhythm of the office, but I couldn't ignore the truth that I had changed. I had seen how things worked, how power and credit were so easily manipulated, and I couldn't unsee that. I couldn't go back to being the person who just accepted the way things were. I had to decide if I could keep pushing forward in a place where I knew the truth wasn't always welcomed. Or perhaps it was time to move on? The idea of leaving had crossed my mind more than once, but every time I hesitated. The job was stable, the environment was comfortable, and I had built relationships over the years. But at the end of the day, none of that mattered if it meant compromising my own values. And so I found myself standing at a crossroads. Do I continue on this path with all its uncertainty and discomfort, knowing that it might be the only way to stay true to who I've become? Or do I walk away and seek a place where I can start fresh, where I'm not constantly reminded of the betrayal and the price of standing up for what's right? It wasn't an easy choice, but it was one I had to make. I had done the hard part exposing the truth. Now I had to make the harder choice, to live in the world I had uncovered, or to leave it behind and forge a new path. Either way, I knew that this decision would shape my future in ways I couldn't fully predict. I spent days mulling over the decision, grappling with the weight of it all. The truth had come to light, Sarah had been exposed, and while I had once thought that would be the end of it, I found myself standing at the edge of something much bigger. The lessons I had learned throughout this ordeal were profound sometimes. Standing up for what's right wasn't the most rewarding path. In fact, it often left you standing alone, questioning whether the cost was truly worth it. But the deeper I looked, the more I realized that the act of standing up for myself had changed me in ways I couldn't have predicted. I wasn't just the person who exposed Sarah anymore. I was someone who had discovered the true weight of integrity and what it meant to truly own your decisions, no matter how difficult they were. And with that realization, I knew my future wasn't about whether I would stay or leave the company. It was about making a choice that aligned with who I had become. I could feel the decision forming within me, almost like a quiet certainty that had taken its time to settle. I wasn't going to compromise my values. Not now, not ever. The office had made it clear that things wouldn't go back to normal, and I was okay with that. In fact, I had no desire to return to the way things were before. The truth had made me uncomfortable, but it had also made me stronger. I had learned that the discomfort of standing up for what's right was far easier to live with than the weight of regret. I had taken control of my narrative, my integrity, and I realized that in doing so, I had created a new beginning for myself. The more I thought about it, the more the answer became clear: I would stay. But I would do so on my own terms. I didn't have to be anyone else. I didn't have to conform to the office politics or the unspoken rules. I was going to create my own path, one that was based on transparency, honesty, and standing by my values, no matter the cost. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, and even times when I would question if I was doing the right thing. But I had already faced the hardest part. I had stood up, not just for my work, but for my belief in what was fair and just. And with that strength, I knew I could face whatever came next. The office would never be the same, and neither would I, but this was the beginning of a new chapter, one that was shaped by the decisions I had made and the lessons I had learned along the way. And in that new chapter, I knew I would continue to move forward. With the same integrity, the same strength, and the same unwavering belief in doing what was right. As I look back on everything that's happened, I realized that the truth, while it set me free, also opened doors to a reality I hadn't fully considered. Standing up for what's right, exposing a lie, and claiming what's mine, it all seemed so clear in theory. But the road to it was filled with unexpected turns, moments of doubt, and painful realizations. In the end, I realized the hardest part wasn't confronting Sarah or playing the long game to gather proof. It was confronting myself. The lessons I learned from this experience weren't just about workplace politics or about holding people accountable. They were lessons about who I am, what I'm willing to stand for, and what I truly value. The truth isn't just about exposing someone else's lies. It's also about being honest with yourself. I had to ask myself hard questions along the way. Was I willing to lose my peace to protect my work? Could I remain true to myself, even when the world around me didn't always value what I was doing? And in the end, I found that the answers didn't come easily, but they came clearly. It's not enough to just be right. It's about how you carry yourself while you're being right. Integrity doesn't need applause, and it certainly doesn't need to be flashy. It simply needs to exist in everything you do, in every decision you make, and in how you interact with the world around you. The truth had come to light, and Sarah had been held accountable for her actions. But what remained after all of that was the truth about me. I had faced the consequences of standing up for what was right, and I had weathered the emotional storm that followed. But it didn't break me. It made me stronger, more self-assured, and more capable of handling whatever comes next. The office had changed, and so had I no longer felt like I had to conform to the expectations of others. I had created a new path for myself, a path built on honesty, strength, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths head-on. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the consequences, not of the challenge, and certainly not of the truth. And as I sit here now, reflecting on everything I've been through, I realize this experience wasn't just about exposing Sarah. It was about exposing the parts of myself I hadn't even realized I was hiding. It was about reclaiming my voice, my value, and my sense of self-worth. And the best part? I was the one who got to decide how my story would unfold moving forward. The moral of it all is simple integrity isn't a choice you make once. It's something you live every day, even when it's uncomfortable. The truth might hurt, but in the end, it's what sets you free. As for me, I know this is just the beginning of a journey. The lessons I've learned will guide me forward, and no matter what challenges arise, I'll face them with the same strength, courage, and integrity that brought me here. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified when we post more fascinating tales of betrayal and justice. Share this video with a friend who might need a little revenge inspiration.